Hey, what's going on everybody? It's ETA-PRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at a pretty interesting little Ryzen powered mini PC by GMK Tec. This is known as the NucBox 4. Now they do have the 3, 4, and 5. Their naming convention isn't the greatest, but when it comes down to it, this is their Ryzen powered mini PC with a pretty interesting little shape. Definitely looks a lot different from all the other little mini PCs we take a look at on the channel. This is powered by a Ryzen 7 H series APU with 16GB of RAM and 500GB of storage. Inside of the box, you're going to get a 65-watt power supply and some hardware for mounting up an internal 2.5-inch SSD. We do have room in here for that. When it comes to I/O, up front here, we've got our audio jack, USB Type-C, and 2 USB 3.1 ports. Not much going on around the sides, but over on the right-hand side, we do have a micro SD card slot. And moving around back, we've got our power in, dual HDMI 2.0 ports, 2 more USB 3.1 ports, and a gigabit Ethernet port. Taking a look at the specs for the CPU, we've got the AMD Ryzen 7 3750H. We've got 4 cores and 8 threads, base clock of 2.3 GHz with a boost up to 4.0. Built-in Radeon RX Vega 10 graphics up to 1400 MHz. 16 gigabytes of DDR4 running at 2400 MHz, but from within the BIOS we can actually up this as long as the RAM can handle it, and it'll definitely help out with GPU performance. Comes pre-installed with a 512GB M.2 SSD, but it also supports one 2.5-inch drive. It's got built-in AC Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 4.2, and this comes with Windows 11 Pro pre-installed. And real quick, I wanted to give you a look at the internals. As you can see, we can mount a 2.5-inch drive right here in the lid. And we've got our M.2 SSD, our RAM is fully accessible, and that's about it for upgradability. Alright, so first things first, heading over to the BIOS. We are basically fully unlocked here, looking really good. There's a lot of stuff that we can mess around with, but the main thing that I like to change, if the cooler in these mini PCs allows us to, AMD CBS, NBIO, and then we check out the system configuration, which right out of the box is at 25 watts. We can go up to 54, but the cooler in this isn't going to handle it. And to up the TDP on this APU, I'm actually not going to be using this. We're going to keep it at 25 watts. I'm going to use a third-party application inside of Windows to go up to 30 when I do my game testing. But out of the box, keep in mind we're at 25 watts. Like I mentioned, if your RAM can handle it, you can actually overclock this RAM. And if we go up here to UMC common options, right here, this would allow us to overclock the RAM. So taking it from 2400 MHz up to 32 is really going to help out with the GPU. But that's about it for the settings I'm using in the BIOS, so let's go ahead and move over to Windows 11 now. Alright, so moving over to Windows 11, everything's been really snappy, and I kind of expected to be on the 3750H. This does make a really good CPU for an everyday desktop. Now we saw that this is set at 25 watts, and I think the cooling system is going to be kind of maxed out at 35. But through my testing, I'm actually going to take this up to 30 watts using a third-party application known as APU Tuning Utility. Right now, we're at the stock setting, so if I run a stress test, you can see that it jumps up to around 25 to 26 watts. Not bad. We'll have a lower power consumption unit, and for everyday normal tasks, you'll be good to go. Web browsing, 4K video playback, you want to do some light photo editing, some 1080p video editing. The 3750H can handle it, but when it comes to like gaming, you definitely want a little more wattage because it needs to split that wattage up between the GPU and the CPU. And with this Vega 10, we can't hit those maximum clocks even at 30 watts, but we're kind of maxing it out there with the built-in cooler we have on this unit. Still, it did way better than I thought it would through all of my tests so far. First thing I did was run some benchmarks, so let's go ahead and take a look at those. Then we'll jump into some PC gaming, and finally, emulation. First on the list, we have Geekbench 5. Now remember that these benchmarks are ran at 25 watts, stock right out of the box. Single core, 623, multi, 2921. I actually thought we'd get a higher multi-core score. I understand we only have 4 cores and 8 threads, but 25 watts is kind of limiting us here. Moving over to 3D Mark Knight Raid, we got a total score of 9,088. And finally, Firestrike with a 2,560. So the scores here aren't looking super impressive, but let's see how it really handles gaming. We're going to start off light here with the Art of Rally. So here it is at 1080p low, and going into this I just set it to low, but we're getting an average of around 87. I think we could take this up to high, turn VSync on, and have a really good time with this game. But you know, I've played this on lower end systems at 720p, and it's still really fun. Next up, we've got Street Fighter V, and at 1080p all low settings, it will run this at 60, but personally, I like having textures at least set to medium, so I don't mind taking this down to 900p. And with a 900p resolution, medium-low mix here, we're getting a constant 60 with it. Plays just fine on this little system.
Round 2. Fight.
Moving over to something a little heavier duty, Cyberpunk 2077. Now with FSR, these APUs do a really good job, even the lower end ones. Here it is at 720p low settings with FSR set to performance, and while we can't quite hit 60, it's still doing way better than I thought it would. We got an average of 51 FPS out of this game. Moving over to GTA 5, here we have it at 900p normal settings, just a little too heavy duty at 1080p, and even at 900p normal settings, we're still getting some dips under 60. Definitely trying its hardest, and you know, I've noticed with the newest updates for this game and the Radeon drivers for these Radeon Vega APUs, this has been performing quite well on these lower end chips. And finally, we've got Forza Horizon 5. So this is one of my favorite games to run on these APUs. Here it is at 900p low, and we can get an average of 64 FPS. I actually didn't think it was going to run it at, mid 50s. But this is a very well optimized game. I think they've done a great job bringing this out. It does work really well on lower end hardware. And with this, just like everything else I showed off, turning VSync on and locking these games at 60 is definitely the way to go on these APUs. Now it's time to take a look at some emulation, and the 3750H does really good with like Dreamcast, N64. We've got PSP here with the Vulkan backend using the standalone version of PPSSPP at 4x resolution, running at full speed. It'll even do the harder to run stuff at 2 to 3x. Looks really good here, and I expected we'd get great performance with PSP on this chip. Checking out some GameCube using the Dolphin emulator, Vulkan backend, 720p, Auto Modellista running at full speed. I also tested one of my favorite Wii games to test. It runs at 720p using that Vulkan backend. I swapped between DirectX 11 and Vulkan, didn't notice a difference there, so it's really up to you, whichever backend you want to use. And finally, we've got PS2 using PC SX2. I'm at 720p with the DirectX 11 backend. Inside of the PC SX2 emulator, I'm set to the balanced preset. You might want to go up to aggressive with it because we do get a few dips here and there when there's lots of effects on screen, but it does handle PS2 pretty decently. With these mini PCs, sometimes you do have to keep an eye on CPU temps, and throughout my test I always have it logging in the background. Average CPU temps for the NucBox 5, idle 39 degrees Celsius, gaming 70, and the maximum that I could get it to hit was 94 degrees Celsius, and this was with maxing out all 4 cores, 8 threads, and the built-in Vega 10 GPU. That's an extreme test, and under normal use I didn't see it hit thermal throttle, but you can definitely get it there under extreme load. Another thing I always like to monitor while running these tiny PCs is total system power consumption. At idle, this pulls around 11 watts from the wall. While gaming, it does jump up to around 43, and the maximum it hit was 58 watts from the wall in my extreme test. So overall, this little mini PC did perform much better than I thought it would. We've got an older 3rd generation Ryzen mobile APU. It is a Ryzen 7, that 3750H. If we could get the TDP a bit higher on this without, hitting thermal throttle, then we could get better performance out of it. But sitting at 25 to 30 watts, I think it does a good job for what we have here. I wouldn't go out and buy this specifically for gaming or high-end emulation, but if you're looking for a secondary mini PC for web browsing, email checking, some light photo editing, some light video editing, 4K video playback, then this will handle everything you need. It's got Windows 10 installed, 16 gigs of RAM, and for what it is, it does a pretty good job. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Really appreciate you watching. If you're interested in learning more about the NucBox 4, I will leave a couple links in the description. If you have any questions, or if you want to see anything else running on this 3750H mini PC, let me know in the comments below. But like always, thanks for watching.